All right, now we are we're in a new book, a new sefer. The sefer is called Lkuti Torah. It's by the same author. It's by the first Rebbe of Chabad and the last Rebbe of Chabad. Our Rebbe said that by learning Torah and Lkuti Torah, we will hasten the arrival of Mashiach. And we need Mashiach pretty bad. So 1 second earlier is a good thing. I mean, Mashiach will make the whole world into a wonderful, productive place. So here we go. Vayikra. This is the book of Vayikra. Vayikra is the third book of the Torah, and it deals with, in the beginning at least, it deals with the sacrifices, bringing the sacrifices. The sacrifice is a very bizarre thing, sacrifices, because God desires from the Jewish people that they bring animal sacrifices. That's what he demands. And one of the big things that we're missing, that we don't have a holy temple, is we're missing those animal sacrifices. Oh, those were the good old days when we had the animal sacrifices. Of course, any normal person will ask himself, what has that got to do with anything good? What possible benefit can there come from sacrificing an animal? Does that make any sense? To God killing an animal, the animal didn't do anything. Why should we sacrifice the animal? And we pray for it that Mashiach will come, will build a third temple, and will return to build sacrifices. And we're not talking about spiritual sacrifices or metaphorical sacrifices or conceptual sacrifices or whatever it is, right? No, we're talking about actual, real animals, smelly animals that you would never take into your house. Who would take a cow that was a goat? And these you take into the holy house, the house of God, and you make sacrifices from it. You sacrifice them, and there's a whole procedure how you do it. And if the part of the procedure is not there, then the whole sacrifice is not good. You have to do it again. Very, very exact laws of how to make the sacrifices, who can make the sacrifices, when to make the sacrifices. Very, very exact. So let's, and that's what this book is about. What is it? And this is such an essential thing of Judaism, this idea of sacrifices. That we have a special book about it, and that it was a special calling that God called to Moses. So let's see what we're talking about. Vayikra el Moshe. And he called to Moshe. Who called to Moshe? I mean, probably God, right? I mean, that's the whole thing. Who else would call to Moshe? Who else is even worthy of noting? But anyway, it doesn't say exactly who did call to Moshe. It starts off, Vayikra, and he called to Moshe. It's implied that it's God calling to Moshe. But we're going to see this implication, the fact that it's not stated explicitly, is going to have a lot of meaning to it, as does everything in the Torah. Now, just a little preface. The Torah was before the world. In Chassidut, it's explained in great length how the world is being created. The tremendous, the high, incredibly high levels of godliness, pure godliness, are used in order to create the world. And how this godliness is to be contracted and concealed and veiled and articulated and and put into different permeations with letters and things like that. The world is created. And the Torah, though, is in a way not really part of the creation. It is the creator himself. The Torah is the essence of God. The Torah is the essence of God. It's also the wisdom of God. It's the will of God. Those things are also true. That's also true. But that's only aspects of the Torah. The main thing of the Torah is the essence of God. And it's connected with the essence of the Jews. the Jews. In some way, the Jews are even higher. Okay, this we can't conceive of such a thing like this. We have to understand basically that we don't really know what's going on over here. We don't know what the Jews are. We don't know what the Torah is. The Rebbe does. That's the thing of a Rebbe. And he's going to teach us. That's the main job of a Rebbe. He's the shepherd of the Jewish people. He teaches the Jewish people what God is, what the Jews are. So let's go. Vayikra el Moshe, and he called to Moshe, etc. Moel Moed. Aleph, the Aleph written of this here is written Vayikra Zeira. It is small. Can I show you an example over here? I don't know if I have. 1 second. Where is my sefer? If you look at the Aleph over there, the Aleph in the word Vayikra, Vayikra el Moshe, the Aleph is written the Aleph of Vayikra is a small Aleph. Now let me get this book and I'll show you. I'll show you if you have any doubts about this. Here we go. Here, look at this. And also, if you look in the Chumash, you can see it also the same thing. Here, let's make this a little bit larger. Oh, here we have the Book of Vayikra, and we will see here. See, Vayikra el Moshe. See, the Aleph is smaller. See, Aleph small. Vayikra el Moshe. If you look in your Torah scroll, you'll see it's also written small. There happens to be one full Aleph base of small letters in the Torah, and there's also one full Aleph base of big letters in the Torah. Most of the letters are middle-sized letters. There's also a full Aleph base of large letters in the Torah. This is one of the small ones. Okay, what does this got to do with us? Let's see. Vayikra el Moshe, and he called the Moshe. Aleph the Vayikra Zeira. The Aleph of Vayikra is written small. Ubedivrei Hayomim, and in the book of Chronicles, Kativ, it is written Adam with a big Aleph. Do we have this? Let's see if I have this sefer over here. Here, let's just show you. Just to show you, this is really, is it written here? Let me see. Yeah, you can see it a little bit. Maybe I'll get another book. 1 second. Here we go. Let's do this. Do the same thing again, just so that everybody knows what's talking about. Here. Excuse me 1 minute. So I'll get a bigger book. Safer. Divrei Yomim. Divrei Yomim is called in English Chronicles. Chronicles. It doesn't have it. No, doesn't have it. Here it does have it. Interestingly enough, but it's not really that stressed. Where is the here? Oh, here. This here should be clear. Excuse me for here. It's not. All right. Anyway, here it is. Here you can see. If you can see, let it get focused over there. See the Aleph of the Adam here. This Aleph of Adam is supposed to be bigger. Well, if you look at it, you can see Adam. See, it's a little bit bigger. Adam, Shet, Enosh, Adam. The Aleph is a big Aleph. Okay. So the Aleph in Vayikra is a small one, and the Aleph in the Chronicles, which Chronicles is the last book of the Torah, right? Chronicles, it is written big. What does this mean? So everything in the Torah means something, and because, like I said, the Torah is before the world, so it's something very deep, even above the spiritual. Even above the spiritual. What does it mean above spiritual? Essentially, what above spiritual really means is practical. In other words, it's not limited to being spiritual. It can elevate also this physical world also. It can put meaning. So let's see. Omer Razal in the Midrash, it says in the Midrash, Vayikra Rabbah, in the Midrash, Midrash called Midrash Rabbah. Perak Aleph, Vayikra el Moshe, it says Vayikra el Moshe, not like Abraham. God called to Abraham also, right? That's what is the whole Torah? Revelation of God. Revelation of God to different people. Well, God appeared to Abraham, but it's not the same thing as how he appeared to Moshe. The Avram, it's written Vayikra Malach Hashem. An angel was called to Abraham. Remember when Abraham went up to sacrifice his son? So this is an angel. An angel called Avram. Hamalach Koreh. An angel would call to Abraham. Avram. Vadibur Medaber. And then God would speak to him. Baram, Bad, Hacha here. This is Aramaic, right? It says, Baram, Bad, Hacha here. Omar Chodesh Baruch Hu. God said, Anihu Akora. I call Moshe. Vanihu Medaber. And I'm the one who speaks. By Abraham, it was an angel called to Abraham. And then either the angel would speak, God's voice would come through an angel, or God's voice would come to Abraham. But by Moshe, the whole thing was God. God called him Moshe. Became who Bazor. And so it also says in the Zohar, Parshas Balak. What does it say in the Zohar? Vayikra el Moshe, God, when God spoke to Moshe, Kala de Malka, it was the voice of the king himself, in other words, of God. Remember, we learned in the previous mimer, we just finished learning that the king, that was this aspect of Soviv Kolmim. That's, so to speak, God himself. God himself is the king. God himself spoke to Moshe, and not by means of another servant. Now, maybe you can ask yourself a question. What do you mean? How can God call to a person? Does that make any sense? I mean, God is above the angels. God creates the angels. He creates all these spiritual levels. The spiritual levels are like nothing to God. How can God call to something? But that's what I said before. That's the idea of God's essence. That from God's essence, God is not limited to being unlimited. God is not limited to being unlimited. The only way you can say in a sort of that God is limited, and this really shows how God is unlimited, is in the Torah. The Torah tells us how God limits himself. Because you can say, if God is not limited, so I can bow down to a stick or a person, or I can bow down to the sun. What's wrong? God is everywhere. It says, right, you got a good point. You could, but in the Torah, it says you shouldn't. The Torah, it says you shouldn't. The Torah is the essence of God. So when God called to Moshe, so it was Moses speaking and not by means of any other emissary, messenger. But Tzarech Lavan, we have to understand, Lefiza, according to this, Lama lo ne'amar Vayikra Hashem. Why doesn't it say Vayikra Hashem el Moshe? Why doesn't it say God's name? Why doesn't it say who called to Moshe? That was the big difference between Abraham and Moshe. By Abraham, God called, an angel called to him, and then God spoke. But by Moshe, it says that it was God called him, and also, so it should stress it was God calling him. Malu and Nizkar, why isn't it mentioned at all? Who was the one that was calling? Gam, also, we also have to understand that in the Zohar, Parshas Vayikra is written like this. Kasev Vayikra el Moshe, it says that he called to Moshe, Velo Omar Man, and it doesn't say who, Man Havet, it doesn't say who it is. Ella, Bakal Hani, Malacha, the Bris, who, but all these, this is the working of God's covenant. But all of it is God speaking. This is the sacrifices, says the sacrifice is the secret of God. Now God is giving Moses the secret of the sacrifice. That's the covenant. Also the whole idea of the Torah. The Torah is the Brit, Luchot Brit. The whole Torah is a covenant between God and the Jewish people. Behold, above it says, Moses could not come into the tent of meeting. Remember, right at the end of last week's Torah portion, Ki shachan alav anan, because there was a cloud, kavod Hashem malei at the Mishkan, and the glory of God filled the tabernacle. Upirish, what does it mean? Shachen alav. It says, what does it say? Shachen alav. There was resting on it. Moses couldn't go into the tabernacle. Right at the end of last week's Torah portion, Moses built the tabernacle, but he couldn't go in because there was a big cloud over it. What does it mean? It was resting on it, a cloud. What does it mean, resting on it? Hu hamshachas v'hasharas or in sof. Means the shachen means this is the drawing down of God's infiniteness. Mimakom elyon, from a high place. Venora ma'od, and ma'od, very awesome. It was so awesome, such an awesome revelation that Moses couldn't go there. He went up to Mount Sinai. This was even a higher revelation. Shene'amar, like it says, Yoshet choshech sitro, that God made darkness his hiding place. This is a source of godliness which is even above what was in Mount Sinai. Even though in Mount Sinai there was also a cloud. But this was such a high level of godliness that even Moses couldn't go in. This is the infinite light of God, which surrounds all the worlds, that cannot possibly be revealed at all. There is no thought that can grasp in God at all. You have to remember, God is the source of all life. He's not just the source of all life, he's the source of the source of the source of the source of all life. If you think the life of this world is real, well, the source of this world is infinitely more real. And what about the source of that? That's even more real. And the source of that, that's even more real. That's why it says that that's the heavens, these levels of heaven, right, that's too much to be revealed in the world. It says when God spoke to Moshe, as he was speaking from this level, but when in the tent of meeting, that it was such a high level that Moshe couldn't even go in. He couldn't even receive from this. This is what's called God makes darkness his hiding place. And this is a level of godliness which is totally incomprehensible. It's not. In order for Moshe to go and receive such a level like that, he would have to be totally, right? This is returning back to before God even considered creating the world. And this level, it's so intensely real that there's no place for the boundaries and limitations of this world. This is what the aspect of God's soviv kolmim, that it's not relevant any revelation because leis machshavat the piece of it, there is no thought that can grasp in God at all. And God is wise without any known wisdom. God has all of these character traits that we have. We're made in his image, but it's absolutely nothing at all like what we are. Hua Yodea, Hua Mada. God is the knowledge, he is the known, he is the knower, and there is a total oneness. Just to give you a small idea how incomprehensible God is, what are we saying? The Torah is the essence of God. Now that how does that make any sense? I mean, how can the Torah be the essence? The Torah is just a bunch of letters. And not only that, it's all broken up. There's all these broken up letters over there. So how could it possibly be the Torah is the essence of God? So I said, okay, well, it's the way it was, the Torah was in God's thought. And even before God's thought, it was in God's will. And even before it was in God's will, it was in God's soul. So if that's really, here we're talking about this oneness of God, how does the Torah come out of that? How does the Torah come, right? So we're saying in the essence of God, we have no idea what the Torah is. We have no idea whatsoever what's going on here. Everything is an amazing miracle. And therefore, on this it says, Yoshet Choshet Sisra, it says God makes darkness his hiding place. Choshech, darkness, hu davar is a thing, she'ein nirebo shum tefisa. Darkness is a thing where you cannot grasp anything, v'hasaga kolal. Right? It's like taking a person that, God forbid, he's blind, and saying to me, okay, what color is this flower? Turn off all the lights in the room, totally turn off all the lights in the room, and say, okay, now I'm going to show you a whole rainbow. Tell me which color I'm pointing to now. What are you talking about? There's no grasping, you can't see anything. Or Indian explanation is, when we say, Ata Kadosh, Shimba Kadosh, we say, God, you are holy and your name is holy. Okay, so if so, we have this big question. How can it be that it says that the cloud covered over the tabernacle? It was so intense, Moshe couldn't get into it. And here now God is speaking to Moshe. He's speaking to Moses. Why couldn't Moses go in? I mean, God was speaking to him. he got the essence of God was revealing itself to him. So why couldn't Moses go into and take it the other way? If the revelation was so intense in the tabernacle that Moses couldn't go in, so how could the essence of God speak to Moses? So let's go like this. An explanation is like this. When we say Ata Kodesh, Hashem Kodesh, you are, and we haven't gotten to the small aleph yet. We're going to get to that. When we say Ata Kodesh, Hashem Kodesh, you are holy and your name is holy. That also your name, God's name, which God's name is what creates the world. Says God's name that creates the world, that's elevated from above the world. It has no comparison to the worlds. And there's the name of God creates this world, and it creates heaven, and it creates the heavens of the heavens, and it creates the angels, and it creates, that's just the name of God. All these upper worlds are incomprehensible to God's name. Im Shemo Yitbarech Kolal. Ad Shehu Yitbarech, until God Kodesh umuvdal me'olamos, until God is totally separate from the worlds. Now you have to, all that the Rebbe is talking about here, this is all going to be revealed to all of us in the Mashiach. This is just truth. This is just what's happening. This is the fact. The fact is God is creating the world, and we not only don't feel it, we don't feel that we don't feel it, and we don't feel that we don't feel we don't feel. Just a ray of God's. Not only we don't feel God, we don't even feel the God, the name of God. We don't feel the spiritual worlds. Those are just creations. How much more so, even the spiritual worlds, they don't feel the essence of what God's name is. Not just God. They don't know His name. Just His name, Nimshach al Eretz Hashemayim, the name of God, and not the essence of the name. Also, not the essence of the name. Array of God's name, so to speak. God's name is the letters for which the world was created. By means of this, it says the whole world, all the heavens and the heavens of heavens, they can't even grasp what even array, the outcome of God's name is. Hainu ha'ora ba'alma, just a ray of God's name. Ach pirish ata kodesh, hainu hakodesh baruch hu, God b'kavoda ba'atzmo, God Himself, shalamayla v'china shemo, which is above God's name. Hainu she'afilu b'bechinas ziv v'hod, even the ray of godliness. Lo hayu olamos yocholim lekabel, the worlds could not receive from God directly. It has to be God's name, and He also from God's name they can't receive just by a ray of God's name. Kamosh Katuv, like it's written in another place. Lochi, and therefore asur li b'nei Yisrael. I'm sorry, Omar, he said, the Bnei Israel in Parshas Vayikra. Therefore, he said, I appeared to, therefore it says, I appeared to Avram and Yitzhak and Yaakov, Parshas Vayikra, said, the Bnei Israel. So, I'm sorry, I skipped line here. She'omru b'bechinas ziv v'hod, the worlds cannot receive it. Kamosh Katuv, like it is written, B'divrei Amatril, in the Hasidic discourse, which is called, skip this word, the called, Lochen Emor Li B'nei Yisrael, therefore speak to the Jewish people, as it says in Parshas Vayikra. Okay, this is explained, and we're going to explain this in a couple of weeks. No, I'm sorry, we already talked about this. We already spoke about this in Parshas Vayikra. That's the second Torah portion in the book of Exodus. Alderach says similarly will be understood what it means, Yoshet Choshech Sitro. Yoshet Choshech Sitro, that God makes darkness His hiding place. Hainu Hukiv and Shafilu Ziv Ha'ora, since that even a ray, or just like a reflection of godliness, Eina Olamot Yochel Makabel, the worlds cannot receive Kalal at all. Lokach, therefore, Nikra Salam, Bechinas Choshech. Therefore, God Himself is called darkness. Why darkness? Because it's too high. Just taking a simple example, a big physics professor comes into a simple class, a class of third grade pupils, and says, oh, here we have Professor Groys is now going to give you a lecture on physics. And he all of a sudden starts spouting off these ideas of physics. And the kids are just sitting there with their mouths open. They have absolutely no idea what is flying. It's just total darkness to them. And he's writing all these formulas on the board and everything. They have absolutely no idea what is, it's all dark to them. Darkness. I mean, they see what he's writing, but they have absolutely no idea what it is. That's called darkness. The same thing is, so to speak, with godliness, but infinitely more so, because mathematics is just part of the world. And here, and we can't grasp that, right, the high mathematics. And here we're talking about we are parts, so to speak, of the Creator. So if you can't understand something like mathematics that's high, that's darkness to you. How much more so the Creator? So he says, but that, don't think just what you don't understand, that's God's essence. It's not. You don't understand the angels. The angels understand infinitely more than we do. And the angels have absolutely no conception of what the upper world is, what godliness is. Not only that, the angels don't even understand what the sphirot of God are. Like, for instance, the world of Atzilut. In the world of Atzilut, also, the aspects of Atzilut have no comprehension whatsoever of the essence of God. So that's called darkness. Darkness, double darkness. Why? Because it's so high. It's so elevated, it's so real, it's too real. The little ray of reality that we can receive, and this only comes from God's name. But nevertheless, we say, Shimcha Kadosh, even your name is holy and elevated from the world. Vayikra Ziva Shekhinah, that's what's called the ray of the Shekhinah. The Shekhinah, so to speak, is God's name. That's how God dwells, comes down. And a ray from this is what enlivens the world. And that's also beyond us. Like it says, Vayadaber Moshe al Rosh Matot, another place. And also Baraya Mahemna, another book in the Zohar. It says that Yasher Choshech Sitro, this level of God making darkness his hiding place, this is what's called Keter Elyon, the upper crown of God. We talked about this before in previous Maimer. And on this it says, Ki Shachin alav anan. That's where the cloud was resting on the tabernacle that Moses couldn't go in. The inyan, the whole idea of kavod Hashem, that the glory of God filled the tabernacle. That's why Moses couldn't go in. Right? This is all part of this darkness of God, the essence of God that came to be revealed here in the world. Because you have to remember that all this essence of God and etc., the reason God is creating the world and created the world, and he's creating right now the world, is so that this essence of God, which is darkness, which is above the spirit, should be revealed here. And that's the whole idea of the Holy Temple. And this is what we're going to see is the calling of God called to Moses. And that's what it means, the glory of God filled the Mishkan. Pirish B'Zohar means in the Zohar, Parshas Noach, and also in the beginning of Parshas Vayikra. My Malay, what does it say that the glory of God filled the tabernacle? Well, it doesn't say that it filled. It says Malay. It means that it was filled, not Milay. Milay means that something was empty and it filled it up. Malay means that it was filled. The Mishkan was filled with it. Right? Not an action, but rather a state of being. Was filled. Pirish B'Zohar and Parshas Zohar and Reish Parshas Vayikra. My Malay. What does it say? Malay. Why does it say Milay? Why does it say it filled up? It was an action that was filling it up. Ela Malay Vadai. There's Malay Mekulo. That it was filled with everything. The tabernacle was filled from everything. What does this mean? Inyan. If the simple meaning is the kavod Hashem milei Mishkan, that it filled up the Mishkan, Imkain, if so, milei meboy, it should say that it filled it up. It was filling it up. The hina, the haya pirush, it means raksha bechinas kavod milei, that God's glory was filling up the tabernacle. Oh, but I'm going to say malay. That one it said that it was filled with. Mashma, it seems, odzos, even more. Shebechinat kavod Hashem nishalma. That is malay, that the glory of God was completed. V'nit malay, and it was, the glory of God was filled up. And afterwards, nimshach v'titgan lekavod Hashem b'chinazu. In other words, the glory of God full was in the temple. It was full, it was complete. That one was in the temple. So not just the glory that God filled it up, but the full glory of God was in the temple. Malay, it was the full glory of God. Okay, what does it mean, the full glory of God? Not just that God was filling it up, but the full glory. What does this mean? What is the glory of God? The glory of God, that's this aspect we talked about before, that God fills all the worlds. Kavodo, this is God's glory. Namely what? Ziviyakare. That God's glory, in other words, a ray of godliness can fill something. Like we see that the ray of godliness fills me and you and the whole world. That's what keeps us in existence. This is the an aspect of God's kingship, which is also called the lower wisdom of God. This is the source of all of the spiritual worlds. But but its source from this level of Chachmei Ilah, from the upper wisdom of God, which is called Kavod Ilah, which is called the upper glory of God. Ubo Hashras Ein Sof. And in this upper glory of God, there is the resting of the infiniteness of God, Mamish. This is what Moses requested from God. Remember, we learned in Parshas Kitisa, Moshe requested from God, show me your glory. On this it says, blessed is the glory of God from its place. What does it mean? That this is God's kingship that fills all the worlds, but God's kingship has a source. And that's what we're asking, that this mamalik haomin, that how God fills up the worlds, how he enlivens me and you and all the other things in the world. It should be blessed. What does it mean, blessed? There should be a blessing drawn into it, from its place, its source, the shorsha, which is what's called God's upper wisdom, Rosh umakar kala brachot, which is the source of all wisdom. Okay, can I give an example? I don't know. Maybe I can think of an example. Let's say, for instance, there is in the world wisdom, right? There is in the world wisdom. Let's take our example, physics again. There's example physics, right? Physics. So there's people who are great physicists. Someone once told me, I read once that there was what was it called? The Manhattan Project, where they were making the atom bomb. So before World War II, they gathered together all these great physicists from the world. But there were certain physicists that were like infinitely greater than all the others. There was, what was his name? I don't remember. Niels Bohr or somebody, and then there was somebody else. Oppenheimer. Anyway, and there were some physicists that were like just completely above everybody else, and everybody received from them. I think maybe Einstein was one of them. So what do we have? There's, let's say, simple physicists, and they receive from the professors. Now, physics itself is a thing that's just knowledge. I mean, it's just how the world works, and these people draw from it. They just draw from it. So you get the simple high school physics class, and then they get somebody who's their teacher who knows more than them. Then there's a professor who knows more than the high school teacher. Then there's the dean of the physics department. He understands more than the professors. But then you get these super guys. These are the guys like, that were in the Manhattan Project, the top of the top. So when these people come in, so they like reveal more physics than anybody else. Everybody's just revealing, they're just tapping from this wisdom, which is called physics. But it's the real, the people that are the top, they know infinitely more than they can't even explain it to the lower people. They have to, It has to chain down through this whole chain. They have to explain to the lower physicists, and then they explain to the dean, and the dean explains to the professors, and the professors explain to the high school teachers, and then finally it comes down to the kids, right? The kids. But all of this is what, if you want to call it, if we're talking about godliness, I'm just giving an example. Godliness, that's what a blessing is. A blessing is drawing from a higher level of reality down to a lower level of reality. And that's ideally supposed to be the purpose of the Holy Temple. And that is the high thing of God speaking. It's a higher level of reality being drawn into this world, which is a lower level of reality. But this world is the only place where you can reach the essence of God, because here you can reach the source of all of these realities, which is God. Here a person can actually serve the Creator. And that is God inspiring Moses that he should be able to inspire all the people to start serving God and make these blessings come down. So that's what it means that the full revelation of God was in this tabernacle. This is drawing from the level of Sovev Kalmim, the aspect of God which is above all of the worlds, into Mimale Kalmim, if you want to call it the Creator, into the creation. Which really it's much, much higher than that, because the Creator is just a low aspect of God. It's the purpose of the creation, right? The Creator, the essence of the Creator, if you want to call it. V'zeu perish kavod Hashem. That's what it means. Kavod Hashem malay. That's what it means. The glory of God that was full, the full glory of God. The perish v'zohar means the source of all of these sources. Sha'kavod mitmalay. That the glory of God was filled from its source. Kavod ilah, from the upper glory of God. Hainu, because there was this cloud on the tabernacle. This cloud, this is the level of the Makif Elyon, the upper surrounding level of godliness, which is totally dark to us. It's totally incomprehensible. And by means of this, there was also drawn down the revelation of Sovev Kalmim into Mamali Kalmim. And it was because of this cloud, there was done this impossible of the impossibles, and there was drawn the essence of God, the highest, not even higher, the source of all highness, the source of everything was drawn into the lowest of the lows. That essentially is what's going to be Mashiach. Mashiach is going to be just the revelation of the fact. It's like if you have let's take our example again, the high school student, and all of a sudden he understands mathematics and the physics, like, the Einstein, like the greatest physicist. Well, what did he understand? He just understood things that are reality. That's all. He just understood how the world works. Right? If he's right, then he just saw things that are just true. It happens to be that the world is so concealed that we have to have only big geniuses can reveal these things. And then comes along another person, another genius that was, for instance, Isaac Newton was the biggest genius of all, but he only was relevant like in, not in subatomic particles, didn't work with him. I read a little book about it. Don't think I really know what I'm talking about. All of a sudden comes another person that shows a whole different set of understanding, because physics, after all, is just part of creation. But here we're talking about revealing the Creator in Bechinat Or Panimi, and an inner light. Who Malay at the Mishkan. This fills up Malay. This fills up the Mishkan. What does it mean? The Mishkan. It fills up the revelation of God, how it's relevant to the world. Lochan. Therefore, Lo Yachol Moshe. Therefore, Moshe could not. I'm skipping the parentheses. Therefore, this is something like also getting married. It says the chatan and the kala, the bride and the groom, they have what's called a chuppah over them. And this chuppah over them, this is like the revelation of God that was in the temple. In the tabernacle. And this is what really unites the bride and the groom. Therefore, therefore Moshe could not come into the Mishkan. He did not have the ability to receive from this level of Yoshet Choshech Sistro. He could not receive from this level of making darkness his hiding place. Shelamayla Me'od, that was so tremendously high. Hagam, even though Har Sinai, even though that at Mount Sinai, it also says that Moses went inside of the cloud. Vayal al-Har, and he went to the mountain. So why couldn't he come into the tabernacle? As Teretz Zohar, the rabbis, in the Zohar, it says Vayikra, the Trei Anani Havi. There's two different types of clouds. Two different types of clouds. that was on Mount Sinai was not as high a level as what was in the Mishkan, simply for the reason that Mount Sinai was a place that was totally pure. And here the Mishkan, like that's what we learned last week, remember, was physical place in the physical world, made from physical things. And in order to reveal down here, it had to be a higher revelation, as we'll talk about more, God willing, tomorrow. This is the amazing, amazing fact that we're Jews, and the amazing responsibility that we have to the world to reveal this essence of God here in the world and make the world into a perfect place. Okay, let's